Welcome to today's final session. We did seriously consider how we could follow the last session with storytelling, poetry, music, and we briefly considered possibly going a little bit strictly come Falkland, but then we heard that had fallen into disrepute, allegedly, so we thought that we would stick to some hopefully inspiring stories for you, and some films, and of course, an opportunity for you to ask some key questions of our wonderful panel that is joining me today. So I'm Jenny Andersson. I am from an organisation called the Regenerative Centre, and I first came across Falkland back in 2021 when Ninian and his team joined our first ever online learning journey in regenerative design. And in fact, actually, the host of the previous panel, Lucy Letby, joined the same learning journey. So I feel really at home. And there's Lucy. Lucy's at the back there still. And Ninian and his team joined to think about how this field could become a catalyst for change in Fife and Falkland. And so it's really enormously exciting and wonderful for me to be here today and see everything that Ninian and his team have brought into being here. And I can't see him in the room, but I'd just like to take a moment at the end of today for us all to do a big shout out to Ninian and his team, because this has been absolutely an amazing journey, and there is something really enormously powerful about people that are able to convene to allow all of us to have really important conversations. So a big shout out to Ninian and his team, even if they cannot hear us. Okay, so I have 3 tasks here today, most of which I'm probably likely to mess up. It's my privilege to introduce our 4 amazing and inspirational storytellers on a journey that will start in Scotland, whiz down to Bristol, go over to Ireland and come back to Scotland. And if we have time, I might squeak in myself a little story from Wales and one from Thailand. So I hope that you'll all be suitably global and dizzy by the time we finish. It's also my task to try to manage the time, and also my task to manage questions from you. But we wanted to start today by asking you to discuss a question amongst yourselves. So Ninian gave us this challenge, this question to bring some storytelling to you about. What happens if we put food at the centre of regeneration? And one of the things that I heard in an earlier session, well, what is even a definition of regenerative agriculture? I would like to invite you to meet somebody in the audience that you haven't met before, so in front, to the left, to the right, or behind you, and just for 2 minutes each, share with each other what is regeneration beyond regenerative agriculture. What does it mean to you? Does it mean anything at all? What is it? What's your idea of what it is? And then we might ask 1 or 2 brave people, and I have a sense that Michael, who is in the front here, might volunteer. If we don't get any other volunteers, I might have to pick on him. So I'm going to time you. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes each to meet somebody you haven't met and explore what does it mean to you? What is regeneration? Before we begin an amazing series of storytelling about how our 4 panelists are bringing the idea of what regeneration might be to their work. So, you've got 4 minutes. Go. Who would like to be brave and get us started? What does regeneration beyond regenerative agriculture mean? Does it mean anything at all?
I always think about people and decisions. So I start from microbes in the soil to mental health of the people in the system. I always kind of want to do that step back and take it wider than we quite often delve into, we quite often delve into soil straight away when we talk about regeneration. But the other people in my group, I would say, have some really interesting takes.
Yeah, pass that mic. Isn't it lovely when someone volunteers you? It's so mean.
So I agreed with Lucy because she was talking about, basically it's a holistic thing. So it's not just about soil, and it's about the people. And we all talked about the fact that it's a journey, not a destination, because it's something that should be ongoing as well. So you can't just say, right, that we got there, we've regenerated it. You know what I mean? So it's an ongoing journey. And then I also sort of broke it down to the generation. So for me, it's about things for the future as well. So it's making sure that there is actually stuff there for the future generations. So that's, improving stuff.
Yeah.
Do you want to say some more there?
And maybe right now, we're the first generations for many generations to think that the future won't be better for our children and grandchildren in the way every future so far has been better for most of our generations in the room.
Well, I was just about to say that it's, to me, a fundamental meaning of it is that it's about actively seeking to make things better rather than worse, even though the making things worse wasn't something that we were conscious of perhaps at the time.
Yeah. Good idea. Does anybody else like to drop something in? Yeah, please do.
Hi. Yeah, I think for us, regeneration starts with the self and the family or the immediate connections, and with the community. And we look to see how do we get those returns. We talk about degrowth, but it's economic degrowth, but we really need to be looking at how do we help grow the individual, grow the community, and leaning into common land, that aspect of those three, and a return on where's our inspiration, our democracy, where do we get a growth in that. So it's a kind of rounded picture. It's something that we're working on here going ahead with Falkland as well. How do we bring that rounded picture into it? So that's what I would say. It's a rounded picture, and food at the center of it. Good growing, cooking and eating together is a key part of connecting and regenerating those aspects of it.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for those contributions. Before I hand over to our wonderful panel here, I'd just like to share a definition that is very meaningful for us at Really Regenerative, which comes from a wonderful woman called Janine Benyus, who founded something called the Biomimicry Institute in the US. And she describes it as life creates the conditions conducive to life. And if we look back 3.8 billion years of existence of life on Earth, it has a mission, and the mission is to continually to create the conditions conducive to life. And the moment in which we find ourselves right now, which many people refer to as a polycrisis, an ecological crisis, an economic crisis, and a crisis of culture, is because we have in many systems moved away from continuing to create the conditions that are conducive to life to continue in the future and to continue to evolve. So I'll just share this rather complex little diagram on my left from my great colleague in the US called Bill Reed that makes it look like a linear journey. And of course, it's a bit more like that than it is a linear journey. But the way in which we think about it is working at the intersection of ecology, economy, and culture concurrently into the future, because if we regenerate soils, if we change our food system, if we bring biodiversity back, but we don't address the fact that our farmers, perhaps here in Fife, who produce oats and there are other brands, let's say, brought up by Quaker Oats, and Quaker Oats want to call their oats regenerative oats, but it's our farmers who invest in changing their way of production so that food can be grown organically and regeneratively, and they bear the cost and are still squeezed economically, then we are not creating regenerative futures. We are simply regenerating soil and working on the life support systems that are vital to us, but that we also have to integrate fair and just futures socially and culturally, and we also have to work on our economic systems. So that's our view of, very simply, of a journey towards a regenerative future, which is moving away from extractive systems towards systems that might at first be sustainable, then perhaps restorative, and eventually creating the conditions for those systems to continually regenerate and restore themselves without our interventions. Okay, enough from me. My hosting job is almost done. I'd like to invite the first of our panelists, the lovely Abi Mordin, who wears many hats, or as she likes to describe it, one very big hat. She's co-director, and those of you who know her, I'm sure know she does wear many hats. She's co-director of Propagate, coordinator of the Dumfries and Galloway Sustainable Food Partnership, and the organiser of the Regenerative Farming Network, and somehow she has found time to be with us today.
For those that don't know, Propagate is a worker-led collective. We use a sociocracy governance model. If you don't know what that is, go and look it up. And we deliver a whole range of different work that is around local, community and sustainable food. And we work across the Central Belt and South West Scotland. I'm personally based in Dumfries and Galloway. Anybody else from Dumfries and Galloway? Yeah. Hi, Ruth. And Lucy, yes. And yeah, so I've been asked to talk from that D&G kind of perspective about some of the work that we're doing down there. Yes, so here's, we'll start with a few stats. Dumfries and Galloway, for those that don't know, southwest corner, is 2,700 square miles. I think that makes us the second largest authority in Scotland, after Highland, which is like really big, obviously. We have a population of around about 150,000, so you do the math. That's basically not a lot of people over a really large area. You can guess what's in between, basically a lot of cows and sheep, and Sitka spruce, and some other things too. There's kind of 5 main towns, Dumfries to Stranraer and a couple in between, excuse me, and the population is like most rural areas, about 45% over the age of 60, so it's really hard to find someone to get your double glazing installed. That's a personal story right now. Which went on too many buttons. There we go. So what are we doing, and how do I, in my work, put food at the centre of regeneration, which was the question we've been asked to respond to. And I was just saying when we had our little sort of bit at the beginning there, that for me personally, food is the intersection between my passions around social justice and environmental justice. I grew up as an activist. I lived in tree houses to protest against roads and open cast mines. That's the environmental justice bit. And social justice, my parents are kind of Quakers, so I kind of grew up with all of that. And then food suddenly became the sort of the confluence, the intersections, as you were saying, Jenny, kind of like where can I make the most difference? Where can I be useful? And that kind of thing. So in Dumfries and Galloway in 2020, we set up the Dumfries and Galloway Sustainable Food Partnership, and there's a few people here who are from food partnerships in the room, which is part of the Sustainable Food Places Network. And I'd come from doing similar work in Glasgow through the Glasgow Food Policy Partnership, taking this cross-sector, multi-stakeholder approach to co-creating better food systems. And it uses this framework looking at things like good food movement, food economy, food and the planet, procurement, food inequalities and health inequalities, and good food governance. So I'm going to sort of dig into a little bit of each of those to sort of describe what we do. So good food movements, Propagate managed to get a little bit of funding, which is now supported through the D&G Climate Hub, to set up the Community Food Network. So there's lots and lots and lots of really great pockets of like activism happening across Dumfries and Galloway. Great community garden projects, great sort of community cafes, pop-up cafes, pantry kind of things, but they weren't connected. And for me, I think the strength comes in building those collaborations, building those connections, and helping people to kind of learn from each other, that peer support and learning kind of bit. And that helps to build the movement, that people kind of feel like they're part of something, and what they're doing can help affect change. So, for example, those of you that are based in Scotland may or may not know that every local authority is meant to, as of 2020, have written a food growing strategy, which is meant to set out how the local authority supports communities to access to create more community gardens in the Lochlands. Dumfries and Galloway doesn't have one, so we're just consistently holding them to account. It's like, it's 2024, guys, so where is this? They still haven't done it, but we live in hope. And then that food citizenship bit, that kind of connecting people to where their food comes from and helping them to feel like they are empowered to take control of their food systems. So these are some of the amazing projects that are happening: community cafes, say community gardens, community pantries, people making a difference. I mean, who's hands up who's involved in something like that in their local area? Yeah, it's a good few of you. You know what I'm talking about. All good, lovely stuff that connects people to soil, to food, to social regeneration. So on our Sustainable Food Partnership website, when people sign up to say they support our aims and objectives of what we're trying to do, we ask this question: what would you like to see change? And as you can see from, maybe you can't see, but people say they want access to better food. They want our food to be produced in a more ecological kind of way. They want better food served in schools and better food served in hospitals. I mean, I'm sure you're all on the same page as this, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But these are ordinary citizens who are saying this. This isn't like my pals. This is like 300 or 400 people who have signed up and basically all said the same thing. And I've just copied and pasted this from the spreadsheet. So people want diverse and sustainable access to vegetables. I run a market garden as well, and when I first moved to Galloway, people said, you can't grow vegetables in Dumfries and Galloway. And now we have a whole network of veg producers, and we've got a veg producers meet-up this Saturday, so actually you can. We've also, to inspire a good food movement, I have these local food gatherings. We've happened every year. We're sort of getting ready to organise them for 2024. And they bring together basically anybody involved. If anyone can come, everyone's involved in food. We all eat food, don't we? So we're all involved in food. But if you self-identify as being involved in food, you can come to these gatherings where we basically talk about the changes that we want to see. We have some people talking from inspiring projects. And we eat great food together. And people feel happy people in the corner. They're always good fun. Okay, regenerative farming. As Jenny said, I organised the South West Scotland Regenerative Farming Network. That started back in 2021. It was a COP26 related project to get farmers talking about agriculture and climate change. I think Ruth was probably involved right at the beginning. Yes. and as a result of that, we kind of, by the end of 2021, had a network of about 80 farmers who all were just like, yep, we're up for talking more about this and doing farm walks and stuff. So we rebranded as a Regenerative Farming Network in January 2022. And kind of taken it from there, really. Now got 245 members across Dumfries and Galloway and Ayrshire. We have lots of farm walks. We have a soil health group. We have a policy group where some of the members are kind of taking a bit of a deep dive into what's happening around agriculture policy, that kind of thing. The farm walk's probably the best bit. That's all roots pigs. Was that the accidental teenage pregnancy scenario? Yeah. We dig a lot of holes. They dig more holes. We hang out with cattle, that kind of thing. But that's that peer support, learning from each other. If you want to hear more about that, 11 a.m. in the water tent, which I'm chairing. And that's members of some of the knowledge sharing groups across Scotland. More on that. Last year we won an award. We won the Nature of Scotland Food and Farming Award, which was a surprise to all of us, as you can see from our faces. Nice to be nominated. And I think we're all here. Tim's not here yet. He'll be here tomorrow, but Ruth's there and Colin's around somewhere. Lots of really good stuff starting and happening, and farmers being encouraged to take the next step just by that peer support, kind of collective working. Local food economy. Sort of back in 2022, a group of us got together as small producers and said, right, we want to collectivise a way of getting our food to local communities. And so we set up the Galloway Food Hub. I make it sound really simple, but it hasn't been that simple. It has been a bit of a mission, and it's still not fully sustainable. It doesn't fully wash its own face, but it's getting there. It's getting there. We're now a collective of 25 food producers, and that covers vegetables, all kinds of meat, dairy products, pickles, jams, preserves, honey, etc., etc. It's kind of kombucha's on there, a bit of everything, really. And that is part of, as we say here, changing the food culture, that connection to the farmer, to the producer. But as Jenny kind of alluded to, that fair price to farmers. How long have I got? Okay. Thanks. That fair price to farmers, as we all know, we don't get enough of that. So it's tackling that kind of equality and justice from literally fields to fork, although it doesn't do much. I mean, it's relative affluently people who can afford to do that, and that's maybe something to look into in the questions. That's just some of the produce. That's the governance bit. We've got an action plan that we signed off with all the partners, which kind of covers all those 6 headline themes. But I think I'll skip to the video. It should be the next one. If I press that.
Food is such an important ingredient in how we make the world a better place.
What we do on the farm has such a huge impact, not only on our farm, but on the wider landscape.
In the 60s, 70s, it was produced. It has now moved on to about the environment and the climate.
If you haven't got healthy soil, you haven't got healthy plants, you haven't got healthy animals or healthy humans, so that's where it starts.
I'll never look at a lump of shit the same again. I'm serious.
We are challenging the very roots of the conventional farming belief system.
It's about good animal welfare, it's about encouraging biodiversity, it's about giving your staff fair work.
I guess it's about respect. You know, if we're going to eat meat, really knowing where our meats come from and what sort of life the animals had.
There's a lot of food produced in the area, but a lot of it goes out to the kind of wider global market. So we're trying to connect good local produce to the community. And we're the bit in the middle.
There's a really active swapping that goes on here now. So lots of people come to share excess produce and plants and seeds.
I'll come for my cake.
I think there's an element of community and hopefully combating in our small part of the world the climate crisis.
If you plant a tiny plant or a seed and you grow food out of that, the degree to which that is freeing and empowering is mind-blowing.
When you do something well and you can see it working, it's really encouraging to keep doing it.
So that's just the trailer for Rooted, Growing a Local Food Ecosystem. It's a 50-minute film. It's you can watch it on YouTube on our channel. It's had 7,000 views now. Isn't that mental? And loads of screenings as well. Yeah, I'll stop there because that's probably way over time. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you
and
so much,
info.
Abi. So we started out in Scotland and we're now going down south to Bristol, where I can invite another award-winning speaker, Phil Haughton. Haughton or
Haughton?
Haughton. Thank
Spelt
you.
Haughton,
Pronounced Haughton. Phil is going to tell us a story of better food in Bristol.
Okay. I'm going to stay in Scotland, actually, for now, rather than moving to Bristol, because that's where it all started for me. And I'm not going to spend too much on the story. I'm going to move to the work pretty quickly, actually. But basically, my life in food and farming started in Scotland, in Galloway, in a little village, or next to a little village called Corsock. And it's where I learnt about farming the good way, with some excellent teachers through books only, which was people like Newman Turner or Lady Eve Balfour, from the founder of the Soil Association. And I also learned about community and the mess of community living, that it can be, but also the wonders that it can also be. I learned about justice, I suppose, and that was where the motivation for the rest of my working life came from. So that was its roots. And then moving on to Bristol, after a while in Bristol of working on community farms, I then got stuck into my own business, and these are just some pictures of things that we did, some people that were employed in our first shop. You can see, you get the picture of lovely produce. So in 2009, I helped create a community farm about 8 miles out of Bristol. And this was, I was being the farmer and the runner of the business and everything else at the time. I can't to this day understand how I managed to do it, but I did. And this is some of the first year's produce that came off that field, which went on to be a proper community farm as a CIC. our first shop, and we moved into an area which was, let's just say it was very down at heel. It was a very large shop, about 5 times as big as this room, 4 times as big as this room, something like that. And we set about opening the doors to the general public, and it was a bit like, what on earth are you doing here? You've got all this expensive organic produce. We can't afford that. What's going on? And although we had a kind of deep green following to start with, this is going back to the year 2001, so it's quite a long while ago. After a while, we realized that we had to speak to people in a different way, so we opened a cafe within the shop. And suddenly we had a different conversation where people were able to come in and have a cup of coffee, and then they realized that actually they'd already broken the barrier to coming through the door, and they could start exploring some of the produce that was there and realized that actually some of it wasn't as expensive as they thought, and while I'm here, I'll buy this. And so the community build of a store and the interactions and the stories and conversations began. I think we then went on to our second store, which is out in a more affluent area. And the thing that really interested me about that was that having built up a really lovely store, large store, in an area that was a little bit down at heel, I realized that we had an audience, if you like, or participants in the community of thinking people. When we moved to a more affluent area, what was really interesting is that there was a lot of suspicion, and it was all about, what are you doing for me? So I was really interested in the kind of sociological, is that the right word, element of the story of when you're talking to people who haven't got very much money, but they're thinking about the world, is that they get involved and get stuck in and make things happen. When you're talking to people who have got a little bit more money, it's not necessarily as easy. The whole, yeah. Anyway, that's just an interesting kind of byproduct of. We've now got 4 stores, and I think there's another picture of some of our stores. We have 120 employees. We turn over 7.5 to 8 million, and we pride ourselves on organic, local and ethical, and working long-term with all our suppliers. It's all about food justice for us. It's about soil justice. It's about the whole journey. So we tell those stories wherever we can, and we really get stuck into long-term relationships with suppliers through thick and thin, wherever we possibly can. This is on the community farm. That's only 2 years ago. That's some of our workers. One of the things that we do is we pay for volunteer days. Every member of staff gets a paid volunteer days, and quite often they go to the community farm, and there they had a lovely day in the cold harvesting leeks. We work with schools often. You can see some of those running around in our store. And I think one of the things that's at the heart of what we do is recognizing that we are selling premium food, which is not affordable for a lot of people, and so we get a whole kind of load of questions for ourselves about equality of access. And we can't do an awful lot about it. It's the food system that's ill, not our stores and our way of approaching it. But what we do to a degree is that we engage with communities. We have a pay it forward on a loaf of bread that we get every Tuesday, 80 of them, and we sell those as a pay it forward, so all the money goes back to the bakery to help them look after people in food banks, etc. And we do that with a number of products. We've got 4 or 5 products that, and we want to keep on building that. But I'm under no illusion that it is still a relatively thin layer of people who are benefiting from that system. I'm going to move on to Bristol. Bristol's a funny old place. It's rather wonderful in some ways. It's a place which has had 3 or 4 city farms for generations, so it's enabled that to happen within a relative, 500,000 people across a large geographical area. It's grown from that. And I worked on one of them in the 80s, and it really does give you an opportunity, city farms, to talk to the local people and it's very open and accessible. And generally speaking, they're based around animals because kids love to find out about the animals, and the parents can then feel eager and able to learn about food and farming a little bit more. We also had the benefit of somebody writing an amazing report called Who Feeds Bristol in 2011. It was a kind of academic paper. It was a kind of 3-year study, and it was really, really found formational in what then happened in Bristol in terms of people identifying, reading, and thinking, how can I do stuff in Bristol that's going to make a difference? And I think really the spirit of Bristol is that it's got an entrepreneurial, can-do, let's just make it happen sort of feel to it. And it did go on to win the Gold Award for, I can't even remember what it's called.
Sustainable
actually.
Food Places.
Sustainable Foods what?
Places.
Sustainable Foods Places, thank you. What this is about, I'm not going to go through it all because it's long-winded, but I encourage you to take photographs of it or see if you can get hold of the slide in some way or shape or form from the organisers or from me for that matter. But it has got a lot in it about what's going on in Bristol and what our vehicles for moving things on are. But I think at the essence of it, I would just go back to that thing that wherever you are, and you've been doing this in Dumfries and Galloway and the area a lot, obviously, it's about getting out there and actually just doing it and making lots of wonderful mistakes and thinking, oh God, what a car crash that was, but then getting back up and saying, you know what, I'm going to do that same again, but I'm going to learn from my mistakes. And it sometimes takes courage, that, because people get hurt on the journeys occasionally and you waste money or whatever. But I think for me in my business, the thing that I found able to do is to do just that, is to get up. I've lost loads of money. I'm just going to see if we can find a way through. So we've been continuously trading now since 1992 in one shape or another, first as home delivery and then moving on to stores. And we had a vision which is very different, if you like, to the small is beautiful kind of essence of lots and lots and lots of little strands throughout Bristol. We want to grow, not just in Bristol, but outside of Bristol, to what we're calling Journey 100, which is our vision is 100 stores. Because we really want to have impact. We want to make sure that there are more farmers who are invited into a relationship with their interests at heart. Because what gets me out of bed more than anything else is soil justice. And that means justice for our farmers and their livelihoods and having those long-term relationships. So whilst it's different from having hundreds and hundreds of small little outfits, which for me are the lifeblood of Bristol's regenerative community. We are playing an equally important part, but at a different scale. And yeah, I think that's what all I need to say about better food at the moment and about Bristol. But hopefully we'll come on to questions. But yes, food justice is just so important. That's why we're here, really, isn't it, I think? Thank you.
Phil, thank you very much. So we've heard for a story of county-level community relationships and engagement. Certainly for me, the first time today, some ideas about how we can bring that kind of transformative change into a city environment. And now we're going to hear from Pieter Ploeg from Commonland. How many of you have ever heard of Commonland before? Oh, good. Lots of people. Then you are already well known. I'm going to invite Pieter to talk about Commonland's work, which is global on land restoration in very many different parts of the world, and his perspective on integrating food into land restoration. Over to you.
Lovely, thank you. So yeah, we'll start globally, but we'll end up actually in Ireland, where I also live as a blow-in. My accent may reveal that I'm Dutch, so thank you for welcoming me in Scotland. So Commonland is a not-for-profit organization that has a bold aim to restore landscapes and regenerate the earth, our common land. So this sometimes leads to confusion, especially here in the UK around commonages. So no, we're not about owning land, but we're about this bigger story of our land, us, all the people on earth, and the land we share. Not in the best of states. I'm also having funny fonts, but the total area degraded globally is the size of the US and China combined. But luckily, as much of a dire state it is, luckily that can also be restored. This was the big inspiration to start Commonland 12 years ago, the restoration of the Lus Plateau in China, and the beautiful before and after photos made by John D. Liu, Chinese-American filmmaker. So knowing that this can be done, we have a bold aim as Commonland to help and restore 100 million hectares by 2040. But we don't do that ourselves. We do that with an amazing group of partners that are on the ground doing the actual restoration work. So we do that in many more, in 20 and growing amount of countries, from faraway places such as New Zealand, Galapagos Islands, but also closer to home, several landscapes in Europe. There's one core set of beliefs at the work, or one core element of the work of Commonland, which is around this idea of the 4 returns. So when we restore landscapes holistically, obviously we're doing that for the care of nature. So we'd like to see a restoration of biodiversity, soil quality, water quality, but none of that can actually be truly regenerative and sustainable if it doesn't include also a social element. If nature's thriving but people are suffering, we're not there yet. And when nature's thriving and people are thriving, and where there's no functioning economy, well, then the system will collapse again. So we need all 3. But what our founder realizes, the 3-legged stool is not enough either, because what is really driving the change? Yes, we can go for natural capital restoration, we can go for social capital restoration, we can go for financial capital restoration and a financial return, but driving for change, there's something else needed there. And what we see in degraded landscapes is a loss of long-term income, people moving away, there's no future economy, a loss of biodiversity, loss of jobs, but most importantly, a loss of purpose and hope. What drives young people out of desertifying southern Spain to Madrid? There's no future. There's no hope or purpose. So maybe the most important return is the return of inspiration. So we put that return at the beginning of all of our work. It starts with cultivating a return of inspiration for the future of the landscape. And then with that inspiration, we can convene people to help restore the ecosystem and social systems as well as the economy. So that's the 4 losses and the 4 returns. We've built a framework around that, where the 4 returns are at the center. We have process elements. I'll speak to those in a minute. We look at the landscape in zones. So there's most of the time there's a natural zone where a natural ecosystem can flourish, and farming is less, has less of a place. There's also economic zones, cities, industries, high productive farmland. So we try to look at the whole landscape level. We also take a long timeline. It takes at least 20 years to restore a landscape. So if we spend 2 years just cultivating inspiration, that's fine, that's part of it. It takes a long time. So we're in it for the long run, and we build long-lasting partnerships. So the 5 elements is we start with that partnership building on the ground. We try to reach this shared understanding of what is it that how do we look at this landscape together with those in the landscape. And we build a landscape plan, and that landscape plan is describing the state of the landscape, what needs to be done about it, and how we're going to do it. We then start to implement and go into a continuous cycle of monitoring and learning. So this may look linear, but it's a continuous process. So closer to home, we're starting to look at areas of the world that have a particular case for restoration. And if we look at the area where we are now, traditionally, we would be in Celtic broadleaf forests, North Atlantic moist mixed forests, and Caledonian conifer forests. Well, those forests are long gone. We have explored the world. I could include the Dutch in the group of colonizing countries that has explored the world and used those trees to build the ships to do so. So if we look at what the natural ecosystem would like to be, we can start to see what kind of restoration potential there is. So some of that is reforestation, carbon, bringing by biodiversity. There could be some agroforestry. But there's also peatlands and wetlands. So re-wetting, again, carbon, biodiversity, polluticulture, building new economies on re-wetting peatlands. But there's also the big farming transition. Obviously, this is very productive land. So all of that farming can also transition and should transition to a more sustainable or regenerative farming model. We're going to zoom into Ireland, where we have depleted land, we have soil degradation, we have low levels of water quality, low levels of food quality, loss of species, habitats, ecosystems. Ireland is second lowest in terms of forest cover of all of the EU. The EU may no longer be a relevant concept for all of you, but for us, we still compare ourselves to other EU member states. It's only Malta that has less forest cover, and Malta is that piece of rock in the Mediterranean. So, yeah, there is something to say about the state. Again, Ireland, similarly, sheep, cows, and Sitka spruce. So, yeah, there is restoration potential. So we're based in the southeast. So when I say we, Commonland supports the work on the ground by partners in the southeast. So I happen to also live in the southeast, very privileged to live in a landscape that I'm also supporting. But we have local partners doing the actual work. So our local weaver, which is the role that we call to the person who convenes the stakeholders in the region. The previous session was talking about okay, who starts that work then of bringing the landscape together? Well, we call that person a weaver. Sometimes it's a team, a weaving team. And the weaver in our bioregion in the southeast, actually in the room, Sarah Prosser, our local colleague. So if you have questions for her how it is to be a weaver, then you'll find her there. So we have recently supported the launch of the Bioregional Weaving Alliance, which may have an Ireland focus, but will build on the southeast, with local partners such as GIY, the Bright Projects, Dunhill Eco Park, and many more. So we've been there for 2 years, supporting, building the alliance, and identifying what we call emerging concepts. So like, what are the things we should be changing about this landscape if we want to move towards that vision? Also contributing to national policy around shifting dairy. Dairy is the biggest agricultural land use in this bioregion, and by now there's about 150 engaged stakeholders. Nearly at the end here of this little presentation, this is the current map of the bioregion, as we call it. So we're following watersheds. We're also going across county boundaries. So County Waterford is a big part of it, but also County Cork, Kilkenny, Tipperary, and Wexford. Where we have uplands areas, mostly sheep grazing, a lot of dairy systems on the lower hills, 4 major rivers, a unique coastline, and only very few areas are actually protected. So if we were to do a first zoning map, yes, most of the land use economy is driven towards economic profitability, so there's not yet a forward change embedded. So the map still looks very orange, but this is a very first draft version of what the 3-zone map of the current status is. But maybe more importantly, it's about visioning. Where do we want this landscape to be in 20 years? So that is not for me to say, but stakeholders from the bioregion itself have crafted a vision for the future of, back then called Waterford, but the southeast, in a food manifesto. So food, and that's also how I think it links to this session, was very much at the center of that vision. And I think all that's left to do is to play that food manifesto to you, developed by a whole group of local stakeholders, but voiced by Ray McGraw, a big ambassador and supporter of the work.
Thanks, Pieter.
Food is not a luxury. Food is a basic social need to which everyone has a right. It is a right not only to enjoy food, but to be able to create it. Food is a way of building ideas, connections, and communities. Through food, we become aware of ourselves and of each other. Food is a common good. It is grounded in our common need and our common vulnerability. Food is revolutionary. How we grow food, how we consume it, how we think about it, can lead to radical change. Food is not only about the present. Rethinking our relationship with food is a call for a different future, a better one. We, the local producers and consumers of food in the Waterford bioregion, assert that we have the right to a good quality of life, grounded in communities of mutual support. We have the right to disagree, to disrupt the status quo. We have the right to respect, even while we dissent. Our dissent is moral, philosophical, cultural, affective, economic, and political, sometimes all at once. Our dissent is about building a better world because we are the ultimate decision makers. We stand for the breaking down of barriers between thinkers and doers. We are, all of us, both thinkers and doers. We stand for a reinvention of the relationship between producers, retailers, and consumers. We stand for a renewed focus on quality of life for all, for food that is sustainable for our health, for the protection of the land, the richness of the soil, the flourishing of the imagination. We stand for new ideas, new stories, new inspirations. We stand for new ways of relating to the food we grow and eat. We want future food to come from a place where community is core. Our aims are both visionary and practical. We want to create new habits and new ways of working. We want viable ways of living. We want to protect our rivers, restore nature, cherish life. We want a world where everything is connected, from rocks to the human heart. We want our children and grandchildren to know the taste of wild salmon and the foods those before us enjoyed. We want to be good guardians of the soil and of our traditions. We want to become good ancestors. We want future food to be grown and eaten with passion, without which we will fail. We want future food to be inspirational, to be easy to get and affordable for all, to be connected to people and communities. We want food to be familiar, to be surprising, to be secure, in a system where farmers and consumers share an interest in this security. We want food to be pristine, to be fair, to be seasonal, to be delicious, to be nutritious.
I want to invite Carolyn Bell from Fife County Council, who has been, I hope it's fair to say, largely responsible for developing the Food for Fife strategy. So we've heard a wonderful vision there and manifesto, I think, but visions and manifestos have to actually be turned into strategies and action. So Carolyn, I'll just fix your slides. Over to you.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, it's okay?
Thank you for that introduction, and I can't take credit for this strategy at all. It is absolutely a partnership project. So I will start by telling you a story about how it started, really. And I did have, we made a film called Fields of Hope, which I think is very appropriate, with some of our Fife farmers, which was premiered at COP26. And I apologise that the download wasn't successful today, but the link is on the website. You'll see the website, r5.scot.stroke-food. That's where you'll find our website and our film and our strategy. So, once upon a time, in 2020, Fife Council declared a climate emergency. And out of that was born the Climate Fife Action Plan. And within that action plan, they gave us the mandate to actually create a food strategy. And so my role was to go out and coordinate a food partnership from people from all parts of the food system in Fife. And that started a very inspirational journey, because I think if we address that question, what happens when you put food at the heart of a region or a system, you start to realize all the amazing work and the people who are in that food system, and you're able to bring them together. And I think this journey that we've been on for the past 3 years now, and it seems a long time, but we've got here, is that you start to work together, and I think partnership is key in this going forward. Just the fact that we are here in this field, Ninian, one of the partners on the partnership, we're bringing all the farmers together who are speaking with policymakers. You know, Fife Council hasn't been used to reaching out and speaking with farmers. And this is a journey, you know, that I started to, and Nourish Scotland, Pete Ritchie from Nourish Scotland was instrumental, and Toby here has been really supportive. And so all our farmers in Fife have been coming together to support this strategy here. And they're one of the pillars, and I'll go in to talk about the pillars. Right. So in 2021, we had a food vision workshop, and we brought people from different parts of the food system together. And we decided how are we going to form this vision. And so you can see here that we've got pillars similar to what Abi was talking about. And again, that comes from Sustainable Food Places. They've been really supportive in helping us look at how do we break that system and make it come together? How do we put it into simple parts? Because it is quite complex, a food system. So how do we make it so it's not linear, but that people can still understand it as a whole? So we put it into these pillars, which you've just heard from other partners here. Partnership working, healthy food for all, community food, catering and procurement, the food economy, and farming, soils and climate. So that is our framework. And within the strategy, we wanted to have some transformational projects. So I'll sort of talk a little bit about those projects. And it's really to create a sustainable food culture for a healthy Fife. So that was our strapline moving forward. And so here's our pillar framework here. And again, that kind of describes what we're trying to do in each of those pillars. And we have a partnership that we set up in 2021. And then in 2022, we started writing the strategy, bringing together all these different concepts of what we needed to do. What does good look like? You know, by the time we get to 2030, what does good look like? And then start looking at the steps we need to get there and coming backwards and then thinking, what do we need to do? So that's the pillar framework. So if we look at what we're trying to do with the communities, is we want to build infrastructure, I think is what we're trying to say here. Because to how do we increase more local food onto the plates of Fifers? You know, how do we get the food that we are growing in Fife onto Fifers' plates? Because at the moment we have an amazing amount of food that's grown in Fife, but we don't necessarily eat it. Everybody is all going out, individual businesses, and they're all exporting it out of Fife, and then it comes back in as processed food that we buy in the supermarkets. We don't necessarily, apart from the wonderful Bauhaus markets that are happening, we have, you know, wonderful farm shops in Fife. We're blessed with the amount of good food that we have here. But how do we make more of that? So talking to our farmers, we've found that actually we don't necessarily have the infrastructure to enable that to grow that local food market. So where's our processing? You know, where's our storage? Where's our distribution hubs? So this is what the strategy, the big viewpoint of the strategy is looking to do, is how do we grow those local markets? How do we support those local markets? How do we use the public purse to be able to start that process? How do we encourage climate and biodiversity friendly food? You know, we have to be able to buy it for the farmers to grow it. There has to be a marketplace there first. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at what infrastructure do we need to enable more local food to get into the local food system? And how can we get that food into our schools, into our colleges, into the NHS, into the, the hospitality, the tourism markets? How do we get that there? So the infrastructure is a really big thing for us. And if we get the infrastructure right, we can also then look at supporting food poverty, food security, because we are able then to enable access to food. And I think this is really important, the right to food, the right to be able to access it. If you're in a rural area, or if you're in a family that doesn't have a car, for instance, how do you get access to good, healthy food that you can afford? And it's a big question that's come up in a number of situations that we, you know, in these sessions. What is that balance between good food and healthy food and its affordability? We don't have the answers for that, but infrastructure is going to certainly help us enable the access part of it. And the conversations will continue to grow about how do we balance the affordability. Just by being here and having these conversations, the session at 11 o'clock with the Marie Goujon and, you know, Johnny and Rachel, those conversations have already created some solutions. they created some of the questions on the stage, and then in the field, some of the deals are being done. So this is the beauty of what Ninian and his team have been putting together. And and this is the example of partnership working, is that we can bring the policymakers into the field to see what's happening. And we can work with Scottish Government, with the Live Lab, the guys who are here today. We can get everybody talking, and hopefully for Fife, we can start working as a bioregion, as a food region, working together. And hopefully we can, because we're slightly ahead of the curve, apart from the inspirational work that's happening over here, we can start bringing some of the funding that's needed to build that infrastructure and start that change. And I think, as Councillor Wincott said earlier, when you start pulling the threads and you start unraveling some of that, it has that knock-on effect, right across the board. So I think we're at a very inspirational point for Fife and our food system in Fife. And we have our strategy that was passed on May the 9th. Happy days. So and I have to say a huge thank you to Joanne Valentine here, who's the chair of the Food Partnership, for guiding us all through that, and for everybody in the field today that's been part of that journey. But I think the work starts now, because we actually know how to deliver on those actions. And I think working together is going to be key going forward. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please go online. But I'm here, Joanne's here. Ninian's one of our partners. There's a lot of farmers here that are partners. So please ask questions, and we will try and answer them as much as possible. Thank you.
It's a great question. And I think the answer for me is, what we've learned, there are several levels at which this kind of work can be more effective, and there are some levels at which it can be less effective. So at the national level is maybe the hardest. National government is swayed by so many interests, and usually economically driven and sort of short-term politics driven incentives. It's very hard to change the game at that level. So we try not to, actually, except for a little bit in the Netherlands, but even there, you've recently seen the big shift in government. You could say that's years of work down the toilet, and we'll have to, restart from scratch. So what we found really effective is that landscape level, that's 50,000 hectares or more, but often you'll find sub-levels within that. So there might be particular valleys or particular sort of region within that. So for example, in the southeastern Ireland, there's the Anne Valley, and they represent a particular community. There's the Comber Mountains, that's another one. There's the Bright Valley. So if we work in those smaller levels, valleys, but we go across to the landscape bioregional level, and we work at those multiple levels at the same time, then we're close enough together that there's a sense of unity, but also big enough scale to feed ambition, and we found that very useful.
So a little bit of everything, but if I can kind of answer the question in a D&G sort of context, as I said in my first slide, it's 2,700 square miles. So it's a big region, but it used to be Dumfries and Galloway. So people who are like out in Stranraer don't really feel they've got a lot to do with people in Langham, because there's over 100 miles between those two locations. And it really is two local authorities kind of sandwiched together. And I live in an area called the Glen Kens, just along the road from Corsic. We'll have a chat about Lothlorien later on. Love Lothlorien, what a beautiful place. The Glen Kens is the glens around Loch Ken, that's where it kind of refers to, and that's at a very empowered sort of micro bioregion of about 3,500 people spread across a selection of little villages, including Corsic, and they're like some of the most can-do, let's get this shit done kind of community I've ever met. And then you've got the sort of Mackerson Cree Valley, which is sort of a little bit further west, Newton Stewart, and similar kind of thing. So there are all these micro regions within the bigger region kind of thing. So they're all important.
There's almost in a way a thread there that you work at the level of where you can bring the passion together. Yeah. Where the heat and where the energy comes from.
Every community is different, aren't they, as well?
Yeah. I think the ability just to say yes. If people say yes more often, then we're going to have more positive movement. And again, that is about sharing risk. And I think, therefore, again, I keep saying partnership is key here. And it really is. And it's joining up, because there's so many amazing projects that are happening across Fife, and as in all the different regions, that and unless you join them all up together, and everybody sort of knows and is able to support each other, and therefore the snowball kind of grows in that way. So it's an organic growth. And the more people will be positive and say, yes, we'll be part of this, then I think it makes life a little bit easier. So I think that's...
And solidarity.
And shining a light and telling those stories as we've been doing here today.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Phil, before we go to the audience? Do we still have a roving
Well,
mic?
it's just for me, it's called knitting. You know, it's like how many people are motivated to knit communities and to get to take action. And there are all sorts of levels. I don't think there is a level that's best suited to our culture and our society. If you just take where farms are at the moment in terms of scale and the number of people that are involved on each farm, there are very few people involved on enormous farms which have industrialised. So we've got a long way to go to pull that down to a human level and to get the knitting going with the numbers of people, if you like. Whereas at community level in cities, I think it's very much easier. You've got dense numbers of people. You can bring them together relatively easily in numbers, and you can get knitting quite fast. And what the other thing about cities is that the diversity of people in those means that the knitting goes off on tangents very easily as well. So I think it's rather wonderful what can happen at all sorts of different levels. But I do think we have to remember where farming is, and somehow keep inviting farming to come back to the earth, because it's way out there kind of playing with at an industrial scale, which doesn't knit at all for me.
So we've definitely got another theme going on here. We've got weaving and we've got knitting. What's coming next? Okay, it's over to you. Who has... Yeah, please, Jen. Toby.
Thank you. I have a question really about the role of supermarkets, good or bad, in this regional food economy, and I'd welcome the panel's views on that.
Yeah, good question. It's
Yeah,
like the elephant in the room.
Who'd like to leap in, Phil?
Yeah.
Well, I've kind of worked as not in opposition, but as an alternative to the supermarkets my entire retail life. And I play hot and cold. I'll just tell a story that maybe one or two of you heard this morning, so forgive me if you did. But I was asked to be part of a debate, which was kind of a little bit of which way forward. So I was put as the independent retailer alongside somebody from Sainsbury's representing the supermarket model. And I just thought the only way I can do this is to rewrite what it might be like to be a good supermarket. And so I pretended I was the CEO of Sainsbury's and started bringing in localism to it and buy-in from the local region, and 20% of all 5% of all products being in that supermarket being from a local area. And you begin to realise that actually when you get the local stakeholders involved, and by the way, you can buy into a pension scheme that's directly related to this whole circular economy thing, you can shift supermarkets pretty bloody fast if it wasn't for the fact that all they're wedded to at the moment is the stakeholder shareholders, which is just plundering, basically. It's a plundering machine, and it's very, very efficient. So the question that I keep on asking myself is, how can we work with supermarkets now? How can we get them to open the doors and understand that they really do need to shift for their own future survival, in a way, because the model is not working for them anymore. It's starting to creak more and more. So I think we have to learn to open the door and have conversations with them, but tell them very clearly that it does require a shift of their fundamental model, which is extraction.
Yeah. I think it has been, so like a bit like the elephant in the room, because they're, as much as we've invited them, when I worked in Glasgow, lived and worked in Glasgow, and living and working in Dumfries and Galloway, inviting them to come to the table and join in conversations, it's just impossible. So in a sense, there's been an element of just ignore them, because what can you do when you can't influence that? So you got to sort of instead create the alternatives that you want to see from the ground up.
And don't forget, actually, on that very point, that they are followers. I said this morning. Supermarkets are not really innovators. I mean, they innovate around food products, but they're not innovators in the market. You know, if you look at Refill, which hundreds of thousands, probably, well, certainly thousands of around the whole of the UK, you've got little independents offering you a refill service, as it were. It's only now that the supermarkets are beginning to think, oh yeah, they've started to build a market. Let's have a dabble at that. You know, so they are followers, and so the more that we create a sound alternative, the more they'll listen.
Yeah, I think, if I may, a really wonderful systemic thinker, some of you may have heard of, called Buckminster Fuller, always said, if you want to change a system, focus on building the new. But I think where we are at in trying to change our economic, our ecological and our cultural systems is, it's a bit like trying to redesign the plane while keeping it flying in the air so that it can land in a different form. But as somebody who has in her past worked with supermarkets, one beginning with W, 10 years ago, they had tabled a relocalization production strategy. How could they work together with regional farmers to source some of their food entirely locally in somewhere between 8 to 10 different regions across the UK? And that fell by the wayside in the wake of the, I guess longer ago now, in the wake of the 2008 crisis, and was to a certain extent a failure of courage at the time, but also a failure of strategy to know how to implement that change effectively and how to finance it. And I think one of the things that we have to be actually looking at is innovative forms of finance, and something that is very, very slowly emerging, it's very, very new at the moment, which you can Google and find out about, is an idea called bioregional financing facilities, which is starting to be discussed over in the US, and that Sheffield in England is experimenting with, which is trying to bring lots of different patient capital together on a bioregional, regional scale to support the transition from our current economy to a future economy that we're still struggling to design, but is very much aimed at financing land, restoration transitions, food systems, probably at the first instance, but also to be focused on building the biomaterials-based regional economies that will help some of our systems, not just food, but also forestry, timber production, and particularly housing, create new biomaterials-based economies that would support different materials, more ecological materials-based. Sorry to have intervened.
If I can just come to what the strategy was saying, and just in response to that, because I actually want to ask you what you think as well, Toby, on this. Supermarkets hold a lot of power, and it doesn't give enough, potentially, diversity to the food that is offered in a region. And so if we're thinking about food security and we're only reliant on what the supermarkets are offering, then we open ourselves up to a lot of risk. So from a strategy point of view, we tried to look at not creating an alternative, but giving more choices, and also choices for our farmers so that we could operate more as a bioregion rather than just allowing a very few superpowers, which are what the supermarkets are, to control what food that we have. Because we know that they are driving the ultra-processed food system. And if we want to move away from that and move to a more healthy options, then we need to offer alternatives to that. But I'm really interested to hear what you think about that, Toby.
Toby, would you mind if we go over here for another question, and I'll come back to you? Is that okay?
Hi there. So, Abi, you talked about the Galloway Food Hub, and maybe rolled your eyes a bit and said it was a bit more work than just creating it, right? And then, Caroline, you were saying about Food for Fife and infrastructure and really being, key to where you go next. Maybe could I just hear a little bit of how difficult it was, and then maybe what sort of ideas you've got around infrastructure and financing and who's going to get involved in that?
Yeah. So why is it challenging? It's challenging because we don't have the infrastructure really in place, not properly. I think we have a fortnightly cycle. We use Open Food Network as the kind of online ordering platform. So it's like an online farmers market. I'm sure lots of you are familiar with OFN. We open every fortnight. We have about 25 producers, and they're spread within a sort of 60-mile radius across Galloway and a bit into Dumfriesshire. And the hub, I suppose, the physical bit is in Dalry, St Johnstown of Dalry, and it operates out of the back room of a community centre. So every fortnight, every fortnight that the hub opens, customers, citizens have got 4 days to order their produce. Producers have then got to get their produce to the Dalry Community Centre by the next Friday morning, where volunteers, so dependent on volunteers for this, pack it into the customer orders boxes, and then more volunteers deliver it across the length and breadth of Dumfries and Galloway, again, largely within a 60-mile radius to about 15 drop-off points where the customers will then come and collect. So the logistics around that, you can imagine all these producers. We do as much lift sharing and people collecting from other people, and some producers drop off at a halfway point and somebody else, it's like a relay team of getting all the produce all to Dalry by that Friday morning. Some of us only live a mile from Dalry, and that's quite handy for us, but for somebody else, it's not. And we haven't got the kind of the facilities there to hold produce for any longer. But anyway, it works on a kind of, what people order that week is what I've said I've got on the hub, like from the fresh vegetable perspective. So it's and all that money, 20% stays within the hub, and the rest of it goes back to the producers. So the infrastructure, the logistics, the cost in terms of people's time. If all those volunteers were actually going to be paid, it definitely would not be able to function. It's dependent on wind farm money. Luckily, we've got quite a few of those to sort of essentially prop up the coordinators' costs at the moment, because we want the majority of the income to go back to the producers. Doesn't even have a physical shop, so we haven't even got any of those overheads. It's like, how do you make that work and be socially and environmentally just business and keep the produce as affordable as possible, but still with a fair price for the farmers? It's and I'm not a business person, so I'm kind of obviously coming at this from a different perspective. So it's a challenge.
So we don't have the answers to everything at the moment, but we're exploring options. And being part of the Sustainable Food Places Network is we are not having to reinvent the wheel. We're learning from regions right across the UK and from international as well. What are the business models that are working? What are the opportunities? And how do we, again, work in partnership? So today, talking to Scottish Food Alliance, they've already got some business plans around how much money you need to be able to put into it, to invest, to create a market garden or horticulture. So we need to understand how many market gardens we need across Fife, because if we're talking food security, we import a lot of our vegetables and our fruit. And as climate change hits, more and more countries will close their borders to exports. So how do we look at what we have? And we are so lucky in Fife in that we could feed ourselves if we want to. But how do we look at where do we need our horticulture? Where do we put our market gardens? What's the supply from our farmers already? What is the supply and demand? And we're working on a big data project to understand those answers to some of those questions. And then working with people that are already doing this. So Johnny Balfour was talking about land that he had that he could turn into market garden. There's some business model in France that's been working really well. Can they share? And I'm still waiting for the figures from them to understand how they're doing it. But we're learning as we're going along and trying to answer some questions to look at how do we join that up across. But we've got across Fife, but we've got a lot of data and information gathering to put together to try and answer those questions about what infrastructure do we need. How much is that going to cost us? How do we get the distribution hubs? Where's the storage? Where's the refrigeration? And I know Toby's done quite a lot of this work and has been helping and advising us, and Ninian and a lot of farmers have been telling us what they feel they would like or what is missing. And Safari, who are over in the tent over there, they're coming hopefully to work with us as well to help us answer these questions. So I think from a strategy point of view, these guys are all doing it from the ground up, and they're doing and delivering. What we're trying to do is understand and then bring in the big infrastructure money to actually then deliver the big projects across a region. And it won't necessarily be one size fits all. You know, what happens in Fife will be different to what happens in Dumfries and Galloway, or, you know, in Bristol, or in Ireland, you know, because our soils and our farms and what we produce will be different in every region. But if we can share lessons and understanding, then we're very willing to do that. So, but we're on that journey and we don't have the answers yet.
It feels very much, if any of you were in the previous session, it is very much like trying to put a jigsaw puzzle together to get all of the different parts moving into a consistent whole concurrently and all at the right time. We have about 3 minutes left. Toby, I will come back to you, but we have one more question here.
So lots of people say that financial resource is a big challenge, and I recognise it is in terms of implementation. What else do you think is a big challenge that we're facing in the next few years, particularly as we look to implement the Good Food Nation Act, that maybe we can think about a solution and end the session maybe on a positive note? What can we collectively do to support strong implementation of the Good Food Nation plan in Fife or more broadly across Scotland?
It's very difficult for councillors or councils to agree to projects without the funding being in place, because we're not allowed to borrow money. You know, so it's really difficult. So I think going forward, it would be great if the Good Food Nation team could maybe give us some idea of what's coming downstream and what kind of projects, because those infrastructure projects are not going to be cheap, you know, or even just having roles like mine within councils. You know, how do we have facilitators, whether that's for farming facilitation or for delivering these projects? You need project managers to actually deliver that as well. So it's the challenging is around capacity within councils to be able to deliver on these roles, because it's no. You know, you're wearing so many hats, Abi, and you're working with your council as well. It's actually recognising that these roles are important and that they need to be in place right across the food system. So that is a challenge apart from the money. It's the risk sharing as well, and capacity, I think, is like I just mentioned. And then I'm going to pass down to you. But those are the immediate ones from a council perspective, yeah.
Phil, you want
Can
to
I
add
just
something?
say that one of the things that I've been aware of for the last 10 years is that grassroots food operators and initiators have been operating in an area where they cannot make money out of it. It's just not going to happen. There is no money in it. And many of us in this room will have been asked to crowdfund to contribute to those things, expecting it to be nothing more than a donation. Take one small step to the side and look at the energy market. What have we all done with the energy market, the alternative energy market? We've been investing in it willingly, getting 5, 6, 7% returns. When are we going to wake up to the fact that we need to share energy with food and blend the two so that people can get a 3% return no matter what they're getting into, but food actually gets the support it deserves? Because it's absolutely crazy. The food system is broken, it's been annihilated, whereas the energy system operates at a profit. And we need to blend the two, and it's a great shame that we've never really done it.
Is there a way forward by turning supermarkets into supermarkets? Pieter, is there a way forward by turning supermarkets into supermarkets? You know, and change the economy into multiple little ones instead of one big one.
Yeah, multiple places like Toby's Wonderful Market, quite possibly, would be really helpful. Just to come back on that question, we are slightly running over time, and then we will close this session today.
I suppose my answer comes a lot from listening to all of you, and it's been a really, really rewarding session. I think what came out for me, this return on inspiration, there's no joy to shopping in supermarkets. They're convenient and they're cheap, but we sort of all hate them. And so there's a willingness to change. And I'm sure that Phil has found that through his ventures. If we can provide something that allows people to channel their joy and their passion and their loyalty and still come away with a basket of goods that isn't too expensive, then there will be demand for that. And I think Abi's shown through what she's done, there's a tremendous willingness for communities to get involved and support. But there is also, which I know, Carolyn, you're doing, the need to sort of get the regulatory context supportive of that rather than blocking it. So I think, and Jenny, what you said about Buckminster Fuller of supporting success, backing success rather than endlessly fighting against the dominance is absolutely right. So I think that they're completely necessary at the moment, but I think that they also leave space by being so dominant for an alternative that we can build together. And I'm confident, certainly from hearing today, that we've got the skills and knowledge to build them. And there's one other thing, just because he wasn't here when you thanked him.
He wasn't.
Let's thank Ninian, because I think it's been fantastic.
Yeah.
So a shout out to Ninian.
And if I may, because you rather kind of took the wind out of my sails there and finished off really well, so I have very little more to say other than to, in a second, hand the microphone to Ninian. But there is somebody else that I think in the room we should thank, who has marvellously, and I don't even know your name, I'm so sorry, captured the story of today on this wonderful, fantastic and informative board. So can I ask you to put your hands together and thank your... Sorry.
Didn't get it. I'm
brilliant.
Eddie. Thank you, Eddie.
Ninian,
Eddie
can
Phillips,
I
who has shown
hand
up
to you
just for the
to
money.
close this evening and possibly even tell people where they might continue to gather and have some fantastic conversations.
Yeah, so thanks very much. And Jenny and panel, thank you so very much. I think there is something for me about being, here on our own land here in Fife. Fife is a really interesting place. We have that coast, we have good growing land, and we have, I suppose, on this side of the hill, quite sort of fertile ground, good growing ground, and then on the other side, we have really exploited ex-mining territories. And I was remembering a session which Carolyn kind of brought together, I think, 24 councillors who were kind of on a Zoom call, of course. But in a sense, one of them was from kind of ex-mining Mary Lockhart, and who was kind of like absolutely dyed-in-the-wool Labour councillor and activist, and who totally got it. Actually, so we were talking about, what about using these extra shop spaces, and we could do it in all of these places. So I suppose I feel really grateful to be in Fife, because I think Fife, we have some amazing people, kind of, Ed, you know some of that, who are trying to make it work. So there's a little bit of, how can we get there? Anyway.